The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the fifth compilation of entries to the 2022 Orchestration Challenge by website subscribers to orchestrationonline.com. So I really enjoyed this entry. In fact, I was just reviewing it again. Of course, I study all of these entries, check them out, take mental notes, take some other notes, and remember most of what's going on, and then review things when I'm about to evaluate. So, yeah, I was so impressed by the smoothness of this. Of course, I'm going to have some other comments about the density of texture. However, just kind of looking at everything, I am going to have a few suggestions. And one of which is to not trust the mock-up too much here, Constantine. So your mock-up is telling you that there will be like this beautiful smooth connection right here between your upper strings and your winds, but really what is going to happen is the winds will be barely audible here. And I'm not seeing any dynamic marking for the bassoons here, so that is one reason why they're a bit prominent, because Sibelius just interprets an unmarked stave. I was about to say unmarked grave. I'm thinking too close to Halloween, but an unmarked stave as being mezzo forte. So that's why the bassoons are kind of a little too prominent here. All right, it's just the lack of marking. But let's just talk about the orchestration, and I will give you some pointers as we go along. Okay. So to start off with, oboes and bassoons, it's a beautiful idea to have all double reed intro, and I would say, I mean, you will have heard me comment, Constantine, by now on the problems with just dropping the piano-style phrasing onto wind parts. You end up lacking emphasis when you are slurring across the downbeat all the time, right? There's almost no emphasis on the downbeat by, the down bow starting on the beat or anything like that. And it really continues for this whole page. And you end up with repeated notes under the same slur, which I think you're trying to compensate with by having them be like portato, right? But I mean, but then we have some other instances too. So I think you should just think about, just not constantly slurring into the downbeat like this, and just have a downbeat, like right here. What's wrong with having moments like this where, the phrasing all starts on the downbeat, right? I mean, especially in music like this, which I don't want it to sound mechanical or predictable, but at least, with a piano, we get an actual percussive, we get a percussive attack at the beginning of the bar, even with a slur over it, right? So you should be thinking about that. And you should also just be thinking about natural bowing patterns of strength and restraint in your strings. Okay, well, I mean, I've talked about this at length in other evaluations, so I'm not going to get stuck on it, but I just feel it would be way stronger with, like more natural patterns, right? All right. So continuing on, here you're adding violas to the bassoons, and you're adding second violins to the second oboe, and that's all good. This will balance more or less. Like, you're not pushing the oboe too far down, right? Like if you get down to like D, C sharp, B, then it would be a little more difficult to balance, but good players could do it. But this is all good. The octaves is the way they are. It'll be much richer in the middle here than on top, but not so bad. Not too much of an imbalance. All right, and then here you're adding second flute to the top there and taking over stronger on top, and allowing the second oboe to drop down, the first oboe to drop down, the second oboe to have more of a harmonic roll there, and so that it all, this all works fine for me. Okay, and then second bassoon taking over that kind of suspended voice below. See, this is where I would say a little bit, just a touch of doubling from cellos would have made this more even of a merging between the two voices of strings and winds, right? And then here I'm not so convinced. You're going D, A, G, and here you're just going D, and then the second violins end up with G. So I'm not quite so convinced by that. I feel that the first violins should be the ones who are finishing it, right? And here you continue to keep the strings way in the background, right? And you're pushing up to mezzo piano. You really want that strings in the background sound, but I just submit to you that in a real live situation, the strings will be barely audible if contributing anything with this kind of imbalance. So you would be better off just to mark everybody the same. And as far as this is concerned, crescendo and then diminuendo, those are artifacts left over from the piano score, but they don't really say a lot. And in fact, here you're saying crescendo, and then here you're saying piano to mezzo piano. But look, you were already piano. So if you're already piano, you have a flex here, and you're back to piano, and you have a crescendo here, and then you're piano here. But these people are crescendo, and what is their dynamic, right? So it's just, I would say, just get rid of this if you're not going to meaningfully have it contribute to the music, right? So if this is already going to be mezzo piano by the time you get to here, right, because you have a crescendo, or maybe even mezzo forte, what does it all mean, right? And then diminuendo, maybe just get rid of that and put in hairpins like this, right? Just because it was in the piano part doesn't mean it has to be in your wind and string parts. Okay, and then here, everybody gets back down to pianissimo. And did you notice how prominent the horns were there? They basically just like, da 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 ba ba, horns. Even at pianissimo, the horns are basically wiping out your cavalry here. Okay? So I would say, what if you went crescendo up to a mezzo forte in all your instruments, strings and winds, diminuendo to piano, with a little bit of strings holding on the octaves, and then had the horns come in at pianissimo, and I guarantee that it would be way more balanced, more beautiful merging of timbres together. Of course, maybe you want more differentiated timbres, and that is totally fine. But, those are my impressions. Despite all of my picking around at it and trying to clarify things, what I really am trying to do here, Constantine, is to see if I can refine your approach, right? Not to change it and say, oh, you need to do this here instead of this. I hate that kind of coaching, because I feel that every attempt to orchestrate something is a kind of creation, right? And it's informed by the sensibilities and the goals of the orchestrator, and so that deserves some respect. So, can things be made to be workable? And sometimes they can't. And if they can't, then I will tell you, right? But what I do love here is that I don't have to tell you, I do not have to scold you about having your second flute part down an octave, right? As I'm seeing in some other parts, right? So you are keeping aware of that. But what happens here is this A2, right? So here you're being very careful about this, saying first, and then you're showing the split voice. Then here you're going to one voice, but you're not telling us if this is a single player or not, right? So watch out. Just try to proofread your scores a little bit better when you go down to one voice. Maybe you don't. I mean, like here, I'd like the idea like you're starting off with one voice, and then here you're adding a second voice. So just keep it first and second voice scoring if that's what you intend, or add a rest here in the second voice to let us know you're going back to just a single player. It's just a bunch of things that you need to look out for. And I missed a few in my draft because I used an older draft, and I'm still blushing about that. Now let's go on to the second page. Okay, so here I get to scold you about using second flute too low in a thick texture, right? So you're doing really, really well on that first page when, here your oboe players are doing absolutely nothing, and they could be supplying, or one of them could be supplying this voice here. Whereas your second flute, and I cannot repeat this enough apparently, because I'm repeating it all the time, okay? Second flute, or low flute, just cannot compete in big textures like this, even with everybody playing really softly. You got your timpani at pianissimo, you got your horns soft, and everybody's soft, but the accumulation of all those voices together, and especially with both your violin sections and octaves over that, the second flute is contributing almost nothing to this, or next to nothing. There's just too much, and as soon as you put horns in there, that's it. There's nothing left. There's no vestige left of any contribution that your second flute is making so low, which is a shame, because if you stripped all this stuff away and just had flute and maybe a touch of violas and a little pluck on the double basses, then you would hear the second flute in that octave. But that's what it would take. All right, so people, please get this down. I'm going to do a whole video. That's it. I'm doing a whole video on scoring flute too low, because people are not it's a waste of your time, right? You put in something like this, and then I have to talk about it again, and I could be talking about all this other cool stuff, but this is the biggest error, right? And if I don't point it out, then I feel you're not going to grow as an orchestrator, right? Okay. So anyhow, harp patterns, interesting. I like the division of the hands. Maybe they could be a little bit more natural, because some of these are, what if it was like, so you're keeping it within the scope of an octave sometimes, and sometimes not. So here you got this F here in the right hand, here you got a G in the left hand. So, maybe look at some harp scores and maybe rethink this a little bit. Each of these phrases should have a slur over it, or maybe slur from here to there, right? Slur across to there, and then slur to the downbeat here again with this G and so on, just to show the harpist what's the pattern, right? Okay, now did you notice here, things are starting to pick up steam and get thicker and denser and huger, and at that point, the harp is also kind of useless. Now, these rippling chords, beautiful. But this is being played so competently by bass clarinet and and the cello. Sorry, I was about to say middle strings, and by the cellos, that the harp really, just is. I mean, you can barely hear any harp in here already, right? And then here you're saying poco a poco crescendo, right? And just with the thickening and the horn as well, absorbing the harp, it's hard enough, right? You could boost this an octave and maybe get more of a sound out of it, tracking the what's going on in the bass clarinet and cellos at an octave higher. But I would say your best bet here is just to have the big, beautiful rolling chords, and don't even worry about this because nobody can hear it, right? So if nobody can hear it, you're just doing it for the harpist's enjoyment. And I'm actually going to be releasing a piece privately on Patreon this week, and then publicly when the festival happens for the Scriabin 150th anniversary festival, where I orchestrated something by Scriabin, and I leave a harp part in just for the harpist. And just to keep up the continuity of what they're doing, to keep up their energy, because like they become invisible with the surge of the music, more or less, but barely audible, but then they come back with a couple more of gestures. So you'll see it on Patreon this week, Patreon viewers, and publicly in November. So yeah, so let's just talk about those are two things that kind of don't work: the harp and the flute. Let's talk about things that do. I love the idea of these soaring octaves. I love the idea of the violas, kind of taking over that sort of middle voice and harmonization from below. I really think that this is cool, like the way that the horns are working and so on. But here's the problem with this. Like there's nothing here that doesn't work, right? I mean, that it more or less balances. Like there isn't anything that is just horribly out of balance here. You could mark your horns softer. You could be putting these intervals in the second and fourth horn, or just leave them in third and fourth, because like those players play octaves together beautifully, right? So there's really no need to adjust them. And this is also fine to keep in first and second, right? There's no need for this to be first and third or second and fourth. So far, the horn scoring and the voices and everything is great. But have you considered, like, what is the emotional character of this section, right? Is it a place where the music flows free poetically and reaches for the sky? Or is it a section that is just heavily grounded to the earth? Now, the more weight you put in the bass here, with these long double bass notes here, and with the timpani rolls and with the horn pad in the middle and all that other stuff, the more weight you put on that, the contrabassoon and the bassoons holding octaves and everything else, the more weight you put on that, the more density is sitting on that beautiful bird that is trying to take flight here. So I would just say, are there ways of expressing some of these things with instruments that are not as heavy? Are there ways of toning down all this weight? Could you have possibly taken out the doubling in the bassoons, and maybe the bassoons could be playing some of these things and these harmonies in the horns, and kept everything much more lighter weight? So maybe you want it to be heavier, but it's more of a block color than it is a pastel, right? So it's it's more romantic scoring than it is sort of pseudo-impressionist post-romantic scoring, right? Which I think is like, that's the key to Barvinsky. He had all these influences around him: Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, and he was also listening to Debussy, possibly Ravel, and other French music of that time, of that first decade. I'm just trying to think of how he would have gotten his hands on Ravel. I mean, I feel a touch of Ravel in this 1908, though. Like, what scores would have made it to Ukraine of of Ravel. So I can't really vouch for Ravel, but I'm sure that he was aware of Debussy. And there were some other composers who had that kind of were sort of trending towards impressionism without quite touching it. Right? I think Barvinsky touches it here, so I think he must have known about it. Anyways, all that stuff aside, is you just have to ask yourself whether or not that weight is something that is characteristic of the music. And like if you say, well, I think it is, then that's fine, fair enough, right? That's it's just a matter of personal preference and tastes and so on and so forth. But I do feel that even and above all of that, I feel that the harmony and the bass are just a little bit too weighty, even with the octaves here. They're a bit too weighty for the overall expression, right? And, those are the main things that are blotting out your attempts to be delicate with other things, right? You put flutes and octaves like this, that is a preconceived notion of how the rest of the passage should sound, but I don't see that fulfillment. The fulfillment of super light textures in order to get the second flute to sound like anything, right? In order to get the harp to come out and be intelligible. I'm not seeing that, right? So think about those things, all right? But all that aside, it's beautifully orchestrated. It has a really nice character to it, and it's a great start to this compilation of entries. So I want to thank you very much, Constantine, for participating in this challenge and for bringing me such a cool score. I really liked it. I mean, I actually, while I'm complaining about the timpani rolls, I actually really liked them a lot. And, timpani rolls, harp, and flute, plus violas, and that's the whole passage right there. You could cut everything else down or out, right? So there are ways of interpreting this that are way lighter, but I still think that you're on the right track for certain types of scoring. Perhaps not exactly with this material, but I think that this approach would work really, really great with music that was a little bit more flagrantly emotional, right? So anyways, thanks so much for that. Now on to the next entry. Once again, another very smooth, integrated sounding entry. So even at that, I'm going to have some questions for you, Alexis, and I'm going to want to work through a few things and see if there are some particular things you could strive for in this approach to orchestration. Okay, so starting off with just I'm hoping that you are going to continue to contribute to these yearly orchestration challenges because, especially over the next 3 years, I've got some very cool plans I feel are going to really challenge the community and take them in different directions where I think there needs to be a lot of growth and even just having fun, right? Just everybody having fun with this. I think will provide lots of opportunities. So, continuing to contribute, see if there's some way that you can work out to format your score to the recommended size, like 747 by 420, 747 wide by 420 high. Some people got it the other direction, 747 high by 420 wide. Don't do that, right? You end up with a very thin, skinny score. But fortunately, I was able to fix most of those problems. So yeah. So 747 wide by 420 high in terms of the layout, and maybe the size of your staves are great. Send me like an MP3 file, not a .FLAC file, because like most of the applications that I use cannot read that. Fortunately, I was able to get one of my applications to read your FLAC file, .FLAC file. So send me an MP3 next time, okay? All right. So now let's talk about your score. Now, you probably already heard me talking in the last entry, Konstantin's really great entry, about the problems with just dropping the piano style slurring onto like wind and string parts, right? Because you end up smoothing over things that sometimes need more of a downbeat. Like, for instance, here you took away the slur, and now you have this really nice emphasis on the downbeat, all of the wind players tonguing together. But here, once again, you're sliding across it, and you're creating a situation where you have repeated notes under the same breath. So what is intended by that? Now think about, what does that mean for your wind player who gets that part? Will they be playing this as like portato? In other words, like emphasizing each of these notes with their stomach? Right? Or will they be just playing very legato but tonguing things? Do you know what I mean? So like you're kind of like, you're leaving it up to the player, and you're just sort of creating a situation where it's unclear. So, maybe if you just slurred up to the A and then left these two without a slur, or slurred from the A then forwards, right? So there's just a bunch of different ways of doing this. Excuse me, somebody seems to be running a leaf blower next door, but nothing I can do about it, so hopefully it won't soak into the microphone too badly. So it's just really watch out for that, right? And especially things, slurring down, slurring down a fifth is kind of difficult on some instruments depending on where their register is. There's no problem for any of these instruments, but say you were in a lower register of a horn or something like that. I mean, it'd just be so much easier on all these players if they went ta ta. Just the formation of these notes is just so much clearer. I mean, it's not that players cannot do things. It's like, what do they do really, really well, right? Once again, more repeated notes under slurs and so on. Okay, so let's just talk about the scoring. You've got two flutes, you say here, but which flute? Is this first flute? Second flute? Both flutes? Right? Same thing here, two bassoons. Now you're using tenor clef on bassoon, and I really see nothing in this really requires the use of the tenor clef all that much yet. I mean, you could say, well, it's sort of lower tenor register, and it doesn't really go below the tenor staff, right? So, I guess acceptable, right? And then here you go into like a real full-blown, very tenor register-esque type of a solo for the bassoon. So, that all seems fine, but you don't really have to have it. It'd just be just as clear in bass clef. So, who is this person? Is this first bassoon or A2 bassoons? Same thing here. First flute or A2 flutes or second flute? Who knows? So I don't know what you planned there. This is all good though. Two oboes. I kind of like this division here. You got you got flute and oboe in octaves. Then you have your second oboe and your B-flat clarinet working in harmony with bass clarinet and bassoons. So I have to say, like, the only problem here is that you have much more weight at the bottom than you do at the top, right? So you might be thinking, well, the oboes, like, First oboe is going to be working in sympathy with the first flute, and since that's the higher pitches, and I forgot to write in A2 flutes here or something like that, it'll all work out. But the problem is that you just have so much more weight at the bottom here. You could have gotten away with this by just having flutes and oboes as you have them scored here, plus bass clarinet, right? That would be perfectly balanced. I mean, I actually like the weight, by the way. I like that color and the weight on the lower half, but I just would want it to be matched by something on top. I just would want a little bit more weight, especially on the flute part up here, and maybe not like A2, right? Of course, there's nothing wrong with you bringing in more winds here. I allowed up to 3 winds per family, right? So you could have had English horn helping out in here. Maybe this could have been second oboe and English horn, and the first oboe could be doubling the A2 flutes above, or 1 flute above, and then that would be a more balanced sound, right? But anyways, so aside from that possible problem and the use of pianistic slurs, it's pretty solidly orchestrated. So the next question is, are you satisfied with that? See, there is absolutely, except for some hairpins right here, there's no dynamic variation throughout any of this passage. What's more, what's interesting here is it almost sounds like you disabled the dynamics or something, or maybe boosted them in your mix for all these instruments, because I'm not hearing a pianissimo kind of sound from your mock-up. It just really sounds a lot like mezzo forte all the way through. In fact, all the way through the entire mock-up. It sounds like mezzo forte on all parts. So, is that also what you want? Now recall that in my criteria, which are at the beginning of this video, I say, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression, right? Well, to me it does. And if you listen to the piano part, just the color of the different little phrases within the first 10 bars speaks a lot, and is something that I think is worth orchestrating, right? Just like pursuing the way that Violina Petrochenko played the piano part, and trying to be true to how a pianist would interpret it, either that, or radically reinterpreting it and bringing a lot of your own creativity into it, right? Rather than just interpreting the notes in a way that is safe, right? So I would say, Alexis, obviously you've got some competency here. So can we stir your imagination to come up with different strategies, right? Rather than working out one way that will work for all 10 bars, are there ways of bringing in variation, right? So, I mean, that you've got some, here when the parts start to trade off, and there's some things in there, but I'm not really sensing an overall shift of color that brings out new emotional qualities into the interpretation, into the phrases, and so on, right? So I think that is a real important thing to shoot for, especially if you have some skill with this, right? Obviously you're developing as an orchestrator, you're getting better command of the different elements and so on and so forth. So I think that just really think about those things, right? Anyway, so that would be my overall critique here. It's not so much the little things that I picked apart, do you have 2 flutes, and do you have 2 bassoons or 1 bassoon, things a little weighty on the bottom, and so on and so forth. My biggest caution to you would be to orchestrate safely, right? Orchestrate dangerously. Don't be afraid to take risks, especially in these orchestration challenges, because you may completely take a risk on the introduction, say, this prologue, and have really wild scoring, but that's actually fine, because then I can pick it apart and show you what worked and what didn't, and then maybe your crazy idea will work, right? So really just feel free to go ahead and score with lots of variation and lots of different approaches, all right? The other problem, there's a concern the motion is slow, could sound static with the same approach throughout the first statement. That was one of my criteria. In other words, and another one is pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano until the 11th bar, right? So both of those things would probably start to become more and more noticeable in a live interpretation of this. All right, so watch out. All right, now going on. We have a few concerns here. Here you say mute, and I would say, just say consord, C-O-N space S-O-R-D period, right, with mute. Because that's like a sort of a universal thing, and everybody can understand it and use it and so on. Now, we have a slight contradiction in musical markings here. You say pizzicato, and that's all good. And this is all, I'd say this is all playable in pizzicato. But what do slurs mean for you? Right? It's as if the slurs were just dropped on here from other, from the piano part, right? Pizzicato doesn't generally use slurs unless the fingers are sort of sliding or hammering on, pulling off, that kind of thing. Unless there's a pluck at the beginning of the slur, and then the fingers or the string, and it's usually all done on one string. The string is sort of hammered on, like the fingers are adding onto it or pulling off, and it's an incredibly discrete kind of a sound. Like the whole orchestra would have to be playing like triple P or quadruple P for anybody to really hear hammering on and pulling off on even on cello and double bass where pizzicato is the loudest. So that's what slur means, right? So just get rid of the slurs. Obviously that's not what you intend. Then there's an additional problem. I mean, I love the idea of what you're doing here, pizzicato plus bass clarinet, right? And here you have smooth bass clarinet playing along with pizzicato cellos, and that's all fine if you intend that. But if you intend the bass clarinet to match absolutely perfectly with the pizzicato, then it should be staccato, right? Doot, 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 doot. But here's the thing, right? What about the middle voice? Because if you look at the piano part, the interweaving of the figuration in the left hand on the lower staff and the left hand and the middle staff playing these like little parts in here, it's a middle voice that is intended to have some sort of continuity, right? So like this in the piano part, it all sort of sounds like one seamless idea. And then the same thing happens here, and then the same thing happens here, and so on. Right? So by separating things out, you really are creating a kind of an interrupted sound with the figuration rather than a very smooth sound that continues onwards. Couldn't you have added D here, right? And then here you've got E, but there's an A here. So what you could have put an A there or had just two E's in a row, right? And then here a G, C, D, then D an octave higher, right? So that is kind of what is going on to the ear, right? And what is going on under the fingers of the pianist. So couldn't there have been a sense of continuity? I was sort of jokingly calling this sort of phrasis interruptus, right? Because it just sort of feels like the gaps here are not really adding anything to the flow of the music, right? So I think that is a hazard. And then the same thing, and then another instrument goes ya-da da da. But that is also part of the middle voice, isn't it? You know what I mean? So by just cutting it off at the nose and just transcribing the lower staff of the left hand note for note and not incorporating its future wanderings or further wanderings into the pattern, we lose the sense of flow, right? So you're really putting this into, pluck, 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 then smooth, bones, pluck, 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 smooth, right? So I mean, if you like that sound, great. But I just feel that there is a missed opportunity for a smoother kind of expression here. All right, so, and then there's some, I mean, double bass can easily pluck all the way up to this G. And this is actually, this is not impossible, but it's the span of a sixth is pretty far for a contrabass player. I'm trying to think, like, yeah. So like they would have to put a thumb on the D string and then reach up on the A. I mean, maybe it's not so bad. A double bassist, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just, running up to this G and then suddenly jumping down and having to shape this, right? So I think just jumping over, they'd have to jump down a fifth on that top A string. But I mean, it's doable, but it's really, this is not, I think this is not so hard, right? Because it's a bar fifth and then a sixth, but it's still kind of, yeah, I mean, it's not, this is not the most natural kind of scoring. Now, you're giving the same articulation style to instruments that are bowed and instruments that are plucked. You are asking for a tenuto staccato in a plucked instrument and a tenuto staccato in a bowed instrument. But they, I mean, this is almost meaningless, right? It would be better just to have a tenuto mark on your pizzicato here, because the staccato is sort of inherent to the sound of pizzicato, so it doesn't need to be in there. And I get the sense that you haven't watched you might not have watched the 12 common scoring errors. So check that out, Alexis, please. And and like I said, I really want you to continue contributing to these or participating in these orchestration challenges. So really watch that video closely and think about a lot of those things. Okay, so we're getting to another problem here, okay? And that is the proper balancing and mixing, like what do you really want this to sound like? So here you have muted strings. You have the harmony sort of flipped here in your violas, right? So you got the octave happening here, and then you've got down a fourth from there. So it's, instead of the F sharp being sitting here in the middle, it is down an octave from where it would normally go. And what is playing that is oboe. So which oboe? Is this first oboe or second oboe? Is this A2? Here you say flutes 1 and 2, but you just say oboe. And you say bassoons 1 and 2, but you have 2 oboes, right? It says right there. So yeah, so maybe a little more proofreading on that. Here you have 2 horns. All right, so first horn is taking the first oboe line, and then the second horn is doubling bass clarinet. All right, so what is going to sound, if everything is equal according to how you have it marked here, what's going to happen is that your horns are going to really absorb a lot of what's going on, even like flute. And here you have this beautiful idea of bassoon and flute doubling. And I mean, it is really a cool idea. I would actually have A2 flutes here, right? And I think that the spreading of the sound and the flute added to a single bassoon, not 2 bassoons, I think that would be a beautiful combination. And then with muted violins, I think that would have a wonderful sound. All right. But why do the violins have to be pianissimo? Why can't they also be piano? Why do the violas have to be pianissimo? You're putting the violas pianissimo right in this register, right on top of the horns, and the horns will just absorb the violas, right? They'll absorb the violas, they'll absorb the low flute, everything else, right? Now, marking them down to pianissimo, that's fine. But the strings really should be coming more into the foreground at piano. And the same thing I would say would be true for your oboe and clarinet, right? Just bring them forwards. There's no need for them to be pianissimo here. You may be thinking, well, that helps to keep the flute from getting overwhelmed, the flute and the bassoon from being overwhelmed. Well, I would actually say, cut the French horn, equalize all of the dynamic values, and then listen to it and tell me what you think. You'll hear right away, I I'm pretty sure that things will balance out. So really, the problem here is not the winds and the strings interfering with the flute and the bassoon. It is the French horns, right? So, like, how do you fix this? Well, you could have everybody at piano except for the French horns who are playing triple P, right? You just have them really, really just adding a little bit of texture. Now, just keep in mind that, like, putting the pitches that are down a fourth an octave lower than the violas is going to create a slight kind of a bit of a harmonic grind down there. So just be aware of that. It's like it is a slightly awkward sound and isn't exactly what Barvinsky is aiming for here harmonically. Okay, it's not that sort of light flyaway impressionist sound. All right, and then just some general comments here. Once again, we have these, like, what's the bowing scheme here, right? How are these players supposed to be bowing this? Do you really want this like down, up, down? Now, pianissimo, that's all easily workable, but I mean, the player just loses. They lose the the ability of just that sort of effortless inflection that comes with shorter bows, right? So wouldn't it be easier just to have like down, up, down, up, down, up, down? All right, why have such long bows? There's no need for them. And for that matter, the winds could match the strings, and then you get a nice enunciated note, a clearer note on the downbeat of every other bar, right? Anyway, so think about a lot of those things a lot, because I'm not saying that I don't like your score, it doesn't work, and so on and so forth. That is not true at all. But just like some clarity. Do you really want the French horns to go da? You know what I mean? Or do you want them to go da 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 or da da? Just think about where you're tonguing, where you're bowing, right? See, this is cool. Dun da dun. Right? See, you go down, up, down. Just works a whole lot better. Or this could be, see, if you were to correct this, up, down. And this could be two up bows in a row. Up, up, down, up, down. There have been a couple of entries recently where there were up and down bow markings. And just to tell everybody, that's completely unnecessary. Like to actually add the V and the little brace, the little staple mark. Don't do that, just unless you are going against the way that things are supposed to be bowed. All right? But that's not for you. That is for the concertmaster to decide what to do there. Okay, and then one last thing: don't score like this, half note following quarter note in 12/8. Right? It should be eighth rest following quarter note, and then grouped rests like this, not like this. This is strange. You got two eighths and then a quarter note instead of quarter eighth, quarter eighth, quarter eighth, and so on. And there's other ways of organizing rests, and I'm not being picky about it. In fact, it's but it's just this is what brought up the whole question, right? So follow it with an eighth rest, all right, and then you're good. All right, so very cool score, Alexis. I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for your participation. I really do appreciate it, and yeah, I really hope to see you again in 2023, 2024, and 2025 when we're going to have a massive orchestravaganza. Okay? All right, so on to the next evaluation. Stephen, that was really funny. Just winding everything up like that. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're not going to be scoring the B section, just wrapping things up, yeah, obviously you probably weren't planning, like if you were going to score the B section, you wouldn't have the brass and all down bow strings playing that. But yeah, still very fun. All right, so just a few general comments, and I want to sort of make these while certain things are fresh in my mind. One is that I really love the way that you brought some variety into your scoring. Okay, so that's a great way to approach these orchestration challenges because the first thing, it keeps me on my toes, right? By having several different approaches that I need to comment on and give you guidance about, I think you get more out of the scoring. All right, so that's one pretty obvious benefit. Then another is that, at least in this piece, the changes underscore the emotional progression of the harmony and the melody and so on. And yeah, okay. So speaking about that, a couple of little points. Here you are going diminuendo to piano, and then you have harp coming in here at piano. I think in order for the harp to enter here on the fourth beat, thinking of the way that this will be beat in 4 by a conductor. All right, not the. I mean, when you think about it, this would be the 10th beat, right? But the fourth beat according to the baton. So if you really want this to come in and be heard, you are going to have to make some bigger adjustments because this surge in here is going to create a wash of sound in the hall. And then by the time you get to here, that wash is still going to be, the crest of that reverb is going to still be kind of making itself felt. So when the harp enters here, then it'll barely be noticed. So what you need to do is bring down your dynamic a lot more deliberately and really show the players where you're headed. And I would say all of these brass need to come down to pianissimo, right? And all of the winds need to come down to piano, at least. And the harp needs to enter at around mezzo forte. And if you do that, then all of this will probably balance and the harp will be able to follow what's going on in the rest of the orchestra very nicely. But if you don't do that, then I think the harp will just be buried. And by the time it's starting to play these rolls and the other instruments come in, people will be, the average audience member will be listening and saying, oh, there was a bit of harp there. Rather than, wow, did you hear when the harp entered right there? Oh, that just took my breath away, right? All right, and just, I think you can add a big slur over the top of this. Just give the harpist some guidance. Or not. Or slur at least these two beam groups. Okay. So, now, one last little thing. And, there's a couple more points. Senza sword. You didn't indicate that the trumpet was muted before, so you don't need to indicate the lack of a mute here. Maybe you'd originally had a muted passage right in here, and then you deleted it, but you forgot to delete this. All right, and then there's like the importation of certain dynamics into your orchestration. And what do they mean? Crescendo. Just a crescendo. And then the other instruments are gaining power here. What dynamic are they starting from? If the oboe is playing crescendo, and so is the clarinet here, first clarinet, then when the second clarinet joins in, what dynamic is the second clarinet playing in order to match where the first clarinet is? And it doesn't seem to me that this crescendo really matters to you because you're going crescendo to mezzo piano here. So what happened here with what did the crescendo mean in the end, right? What did that mean? And then where are you headed? The strings don't seem to kind of know how big they're getting. And then suddenly they are pianissimo with no... So maybe you just forgot to throw in the dynamics here. So I would say, like, this crescendo is, it doesn't really seem to... Like, maybe you intended this there, so just mark the hairpins in there, right? Or mark one long hairpin going forwards, and then the entrance of the second clarinet, if you're just going from piano to mezzo piano. But I mean, why just go to mezzo piano there? Why not have more of a peak here? Why not go all the way up to mezzo forte, or even forte? Who knows, right? So, I mean, mezzo piano, it just doesn't seem to be that hip of a destination, right? if you're thinking about going on a journey, well, I'd like to go to the mezzo pianos. Well, where's that? Is that like a Greek island? Well, no. I mean, it's this kind of... It's actually, off the southern coast of England. It's near Torquay, but it's I don't know, almost nobody ever goes there. But I mean, everybody used to, and yeah, it's cheap. So let's go there, right? That's kind of what I think of as mezzo piano as a destination, and it's just, it's a halfway house, really. I would say go to mezzo forte, right? Make this bigger, right, and then back off and. Anyhow, all right, so let's just talk about the scoring. Sorry, I'm kind of getting a little sidetracked here. All right, so starting off with this, first oboe on top, and then you have these lovely strings in here, intersecting. That's very cool. And, sort of a big harp realization of all that stuff going on. Very nice. And the little touches of pizzicato with horn. It's so nice. See, so like with this, like the horn doesn't need to be marked down because it's out of the way of the other instruments, right? It's not interfering. However, flute may need to be marked up, right, in order for this horn to come through, right? So it's fine. You could just go up to mezzo piano here and then diminuendo to pianissimo. All right, and then very soft winds. I love the contrast in dynamics. Da da, very mysterious. Now, in this kind of scoring, though, like having your flutes kind of encompassed by your clarinets in this way, just really, like the first flute is barely contributing. The second flute is getting swallowed up by everything else that's going on. Right? I mean, I love the idea of the triple octave here. That is very, very cool. In clarinet and English horn, along with the bassoons joining in here, and just So, I mean, I see what you're trying to do here. You're giving a little bit more weight to the violins and so on, but I just feel that the once again the wind scoring is a bit, or the flute scoring is a bit weak here. But like if everybody is really soft, I will give you a pass on this, okay? And then just like the little touches here on bass clarinet and oboe. All right, so it's just barely workable, okay? It's something that I would recommend replanning, but like it's okay. Like I'll give you a pass on that. Okay, so now, like coming back in more deliberately here, flute and clarinet with the octave violins, and then we've got the thirds and the seconds, with horn, English horn playing a role, fourth horn doing that little kind of suspended note from below, along with some help from violas. That's all good. I would say for a balance here, mark down the horns a little bit, right? So if you don't want your horns to basically take over this entire texture, they should be pianissimo. There's no need to mark second here. I would say you can mark that this is fourth. But if you already have shown us that you have first and second on this staff, whenever we see two voices, we will realize that the lower one is a second. And I appreciate the quandary, right? They could all be on the same stem, except for the fact that you have slurs on top here and then repeated notes on the bottom in the second. And then here we have the tie on the bottom with the second voice and so on. So, here, these notes could have all been on the same stem and first voice, though, right? So it doesn't always have to be splitting the voices between the players, right? As you kind of are taking the general approach throughout this. That makes it easier for the copyist, I think. Like, they just grab the second voice out of the part and then turn it into first voice, or they grab the second staff off of the score and they turn it into first voice in the part, and so on. All right, so continuing on, we're going from first flute accompanying the top violins to the first violins to the first oboe, and then second clarinet. Once again, taking that lower role, bassoons instead of horns, quite prominent, and then cellos and violas there on that middle voice. Okay, so once again, just like changing the color, sometimes just a little bit, sometimes drastically, right? And then I love this this bigger gesture right in here. So first flute, second oboe. I don't know if there really is a need for this to be second oboe, but yeah, I'd say since you are really keeping, you're really thinking about splitting voices and so on in different places. Here I would throw in like second voice rest below the first voice here, and then first voice rests above the second part, right? Just for these bars, it just is clearer for the conductor and the score reader and so on. And I would supply the rest of the bar and rests here for the second voice, things like that. Okay, so this is really nice. I love the elegance here. This is great. This is fine. This is really more of a second and fourth kind of a thing, but it's fine for this to be third and fourth. Okay, yeah, and then bass clarinet. Yeah, I mean, it's nice. I mean, I love the fact that things are not slavishly doubling necessarily, right? It's you put some effort into this. It's really nice. And then trombone. Which trombone first? Okay, it's just kind of try to get the number off of the bar line as much as you can, right? Just put it over the note more as much as possible, rather than have it closer to the note. Maybe a little bit more spacing there. Or spacing in the bar line, right? There's more white space on either side of the numeral. Yeah, and see, like this would be more of a glockenspiel note than a harp note if you want it to be audible, especially if you're going to bring up the volume here to mezzo forte, as I recommend. Yeah, and these, so this is, that all works. Yeah. Okay, so the proper place for this dynamic is inside the bar line, and then with the hairpin reaching towards it, right, giving it some space. Yeah, so no huge problems there. This is really cool. Really a shame that you cannot specify mallets. I mean, come on. Somebody out there listening to this works for a notation application company, or somebody that makes somebody that produces plugins for notation applications. You guys cannot come up. I mean, how many years has this been? It's been 22 years since Sibelius made playback a possibility in its in the application, right? And we still have not gotten a choice of mallets and a decent suspended cymbal sound that is in an orchestral way. I mean, come on. What century is this? All right, get on it. Anybody out there who's listening to me who works for some of those people or is connected to those people, get them on it. I want it to be the norm. I want people to look back in this say and have them leave comments like, Thomas doesn't know about XYZ? Wow. Oh, that's right. This was back in 2022. All right. I'll stop complaining about it now. Okay, so I think that the off I think that the bass drum has got so much weight to it that coming in on the second eighth right here might sort of displace the feeling of where the downbeat is. But you do have it piano, right? But I would say it's like, I almost feel like it would be better to go boom on the downbeat with the bass drum and have the timpani go bong bong on the E. I think that would be that might work a little bit better. But why can't there be like E and D, right? Like you've got a D here. Why can't you go roll D D with a boom on the downbeat with the bass drum? Okay. Now this was all really cool. I really love the reinterpretation of the left-hand patterns. Okay, all right, reinterpretation. Okay. All right, I'm going to jump back. This was the thing that I wanted to remember. Okay, and that is, okay, so there's a reinterpretation of the harmony in here, and there's a reinterpretation of the harmony in here. Now, both of those choices are intriguing, right? I think that they have, they speak a lot about your particular values and your aesthetics and harmony and so on and so forth, Stephen. Okay, so, but I mean, do they serve the overall purpose of the score? And I'm saying that with a complete awareness that I encourage people to innovate and change things around and do things and so on and so forth. So I would just say, think about it. If you have the option of having this score performed, read, blah, 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 just consider going back and having the harmony possibly follow Barvinsky's a little bit more, because it's just like the question of making this, having that sort of floaty, disconnected, parallel feeling, right, rather than the more sort of integrated harmony that you put in here, which in some ways fixes things, right? But like if we fix everything about something, will it be the same as it was before? Sort of like the way that people who knew Mussorgsky's original score as well listened to Rimsky-Korsakov's efforts to fix a lot of problems in his scores and said, well, that doesn't sound like Mussorgsky anymore, right? So anyway, so just watch out, all right? That's all I'm saying. But no judgment on it, but just it's more than a matter of aesthetics. It's just whether or not it's true to the composer's vision if you get a chance to have this score performed and expand on it and so on, right? So I mean, and I have no idea what your prospects are for this. Maybe it's just an entry and you're going to move on to the next thing, and that's perfectly fair, right? So just watch out for those two choices right in there. Okay. So I love this reinterpretation. I think that you could get away with just beaming the just slurring the beam groups, right? So down, up, down, up. It's just like a lot easier than going like down, up, down, down, or up. Right. So it might be better to just, but then again, I like the idea of these two beam groups being discrete, right? So, but this is just awesome right in here. So you have the clarinet family covering the same general thing, and then the upper strings just changing that to yada. Just so cool. And then you give yourself sonic space, right? You're not interrupting too much with brass in here. And then when you do get heavier on the brass, you just move on to other things, right? And change the left-hand pattern into lower strings and lower winds, which is, fair enough, right? And then incorporating some of it into your, and also the bassoons, excuse me. And then incorporating the middle voice into the into the brass a bit, right? So I think that ties everything together really nicely. Yeah. And then pizzicato here. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so just to look at the scoring, I love this idea up here, the flutes and fourths, and then you sort of drop down here with the horn kind of underlining a second flute here. So like it's a little, yeah, it's just, and then the clarinet underneath that. So just once again, getting a bit low right on second flute there, just mechanically, right? It's just really more of an oboe line. Even at that, I mean, it's even not even that low, but just the fact that you're bringing in horn, we got some of those pitches doubled, and so on and so forth. That just there's so many opportunities for the resonance of what is actually a fairly important line to just get swallowed up, right? Yeah. Anyway, so just I would just say watch out. Don't trust the mock-up, right? Just really think more in terms of what is the stronger option when you have a texture that is more complex, right? So even like lightness doesn't necessarily save the risk of what's going on here in second flute, right? Because the more complex things are happening, the more resonance is being applied in there. The more it absorbs things around it that don't have very strong overtones, right? So like the lower the flute gets, the less pronounced its higher overtones are. That's just and the mathematical equation is that you just lose that voice, right? And then you get a situation where the horn may stand out awkwardly, right? Now you can bring the volume of the horn down, but then that doesn't solve the problem of the proximity of the first clarinet. So it's just you're creating problems for yourself. Like it's just so easy to fix, right? Just restructuring some of this, making it an oboe line, and so on and so forth. Just think about it, okay? Second flute does not have the power of second trumpet. All right, but I'm seeing score after score where it is treated as if it is just as strong in its middle and low register as a trumpet would be, right? Or as the first flute would be above it. All right, now this is all cool. This is just purely beautiful and really fun. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this, Stephen, and I mean, I hope you won't take my suggestions the wrong way, and I feel that I think you have some real craft here and some gifts as an orchestrator. So it's just a question of like how do we develop habits here, that result in a lack of raised hands at rehearsal, right? Or something that has a good balance with live players and so on. Yeah. Yeah, I love the warmth that you're bringing here in the brass. That all works nicely. And it's good positioning here in your other instruments. Yeah. Yeah, nice work. All right, so yeah, great score. I'm just imagining what you might do with our 2023 piece and then our 2024 piece, right? 2024 piece has some similarities to this, but different challenges, right? It might be the greatest test of all that I've ever thrown at you guys is the 2024 example. And then 2025, you can practically just pick whichever amongst the different options I'm offering suits your strengths the best, which I think is also a fair way of offering these challenges. So thanks again, Stephen. And now let's take a look at the next score. great work, Jan. So I really love the neo-Baroque aesthetic of this score, and hopefully I don't fluster any feathers by calling it that. There's also sort of a cinematic quality to it as well. Just frozen landscapes and snow on the ground and falling leaves. That kind of resonance with nature and so on. So don't worry about this. I understand. We're able to condense the horns on one staff, so you weren't able to just play them in as thirds. You could have done that, though, just like manually, right? Anyways, it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Okay, so yeah, so let's just talk about the overall scoring. There are a few little things for you to think about. Now, most clarinetists will be able to play a high E at mezzo piano, but that doesn't mean it will necessarily balance with everything else that you've got going on here. I would be almost tempted to leave out the crescendo here and to obviously the crescendo is completely unnecessary here in oboe because you're doing it over a rest. So perhaps just have the oboe come in here at mezzo piano, diminuendo to piano, and then just let the clarinet, leave them in. Leave them in. But still, it's going to sound very pointy here. I think in a live performance, that high written E is going to really, it's just really going to emerge very powerfully. So, it's kind of unavoidable the way that you've scored it, but flute would beautifully balance, but then you would lose that, you would lose the essence of what you're trying to express here. It's funny, like my brain keeps wanting to turn this into a bassoon part because it is the fourth staff in a row in a group of four at the top of a page of score. But yeah, it is clarinet. So really nice the way you have this little introduction on harp, and with this glissando, I think that you need to supply a diagram, harp pedal diagram, just to show the harpist what is involved. And if you're changing to A sharp at the end, like if it starts off just with an F sharp in the tuning scheme, and then there's an A sharp at the end, then I think you need to have the pedal diagram and the glissando between all the notes, like from this B up to a G, and then going on to the A sharp, and then mark A sharp below it. Okay, and then A natural right afterwards, because you're going to go to A natural here. All right, but keeping in mind, I think it's very cool. I love the glissando, the way that you've got it written here, what you intend with the glissando, I should say. It's not really. The music though is modal, right, rather than being like a harmonic minor, right? It's it is essentially like it is an interpretation of G major in sixth chords, right? But you're choosing to take it to be very serious about it and interpret this not as a G major piece but as an E minor piece. And I get the emotional meaning behind that. Okay, I understand it perfectly what you're trying to say. So, but just pointing out the difference there. So yeah, and I like the difference between the first, the difference in distance between clarinet way up high and the violin and viola below. So, continuing on, like, you don't, like, I have this concern in my criteria. Does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? Well, the thing is that, like, here you've got pizzicato and a little bit of harp, and then here the change really is in the relationship between the clarinet and the oboe itself, right? And I feel that like there is an emotional progression built into this. And then bringing in here this third voice here in the cellos, and the way that you wrap up everything. So I mean, it works for me. Okay. I was listening to the mock-up, and it sort of seemed to me that you went from eighth notes to 16th notes to unmeasured roll, and then so it seemed to me that there was more going on than is scored here in the mock-up. Try not to have these kinds of things where the dynamics start before the entrance. Just have the dynamics start on the entrance, okay? Because, I mean, you might be thinking, well, I'm telling my English horn player that everybody else is piano, and then they'll be coming in when it gets to be almost mezzo piano. But that's not the way the players think. Just start on piano or mezzo piano, right? You're close enough to the end of the hairpin to just start at mezzo piano if you wanted to. And considering that this part becomes more essential, then it's perfectly fine to start on mezzo piano in your English horn here. Okay, it's really nice. Lovely. All right. So I don't think that there's a whole lot more I can say about this. You might want to think about things like, how long do you want your slurs to be in some places? Like, do you really want this to be all one slur? Or do you want to articulate this, ta, ta, right? Or you could have this as like a portato, ta, and then tongue here, ta, right, rather than ta. Okay. And then here you're repeating notes under a slur. So what do you intend here? Do you intend for this to be a legato bowing, or do you intend this? See, the thing is, like, if you throw in phrase marks and just let the player work it out, then they will work it out however they want to work it out, and that maybe you would want a different kind of a thing. So that is the reason why, at least in concert scoring, you should be thinking about the way that you give slurring to winds and strings as a kind of a craft, right? Like an understanding how long you want the bowings to last, right? So here you're going, say, down, up, although like up into a downbeat. I mean, I just don't like this kind of, involuntary slurring across the beat. Like there's no down, like who is articulating, who is bowing on the downbeat where, just feel like there's no, it almost feels like there's no definition to the pulse. But, like I understand at the same time that all sort of ties into the aesthetics of what you're trying to do, have this really smooth, kind of ancient feeling to your score. So that's all fine, but you should be doing things that aren't this, right? Slur between these pitches, slur between these pitches, and then I would say match it in your altos, in your violas, right? Slur between these pitches, slur between these pitches, right? Just break this up, because that is what the concertmaster is going to do anyways, right? You're going to hand this score in. And I hope you do. I hope you do get this performed, Jan. You should. It's really great. And it would be a wonderful gesture for an orchestra where you're living to Ukraine, right? Wouldn't it be great if suddenly dozens of these Barvinsky arrangements were finding their way into concert halls as a tribute to what's going on in Ukraine? Absolutely. I am completely behind that. However, that means that the score is going to go to a concertmaster, and the concertmaster is going to look at this, and they're going to just chop that off right there, right? And say, okay, slur here, slur there, right? So if that's what they're going to do, why don't you do that now, right? All right, then kind of similar problems here. Do you really want down, up, down. Now, at a softer dynamic, of course, that's all possible. And I kind of like the idea of like longer slurs in your interpretation of the piano, the left-hand piano figuration. That's very nice. But I mean, why can't it just be down, up, or down, up, down, up, down, up, down? And you can do the same thing in the horns, right? Right, you can have your horns agreeing with a shorter bowing pattern in the violins, and everything will balance out really nicely. Now, here is an example of a score. I've been concerned. All right, I've been concerned that I'm constantly telling people to mark down the brass. And the reason why I'm doing that is because usually they're scoring the brass in such a way that it doesn't balance out with the rest of what's going on unless it is marked down. Usually, just because of the way, where the brass is positioned in relationship to all the other instruments, sort of integrated into wind and string parts, like right in the middle of everything else that's going on. Or it could be just a question of the way that the entire passage is working dynamically. In order to balance things out and to keep the brass moderated, usually marking them down is the only option. But in this case, there's so much space. Or you got these octaves here in your violas. You've got your horns here in the middle with very little of them really sitting on other parts. Of course, like the poor English horn player right in here is going to get blasted out of the water by the time the music gets to this point, right? But to mark them up to forte wouldn't be the right solution. So I'd say just leave it, but just with the understanding that the English horn isn't going to contribute very much by the time you get to here. I like this little doubling of the flute with the second violins. I think that's very effective. Let's dip down to A. It's all right. Okay, but here's the thing, Jan. Why should you interrupt the flow of this long, beautiful phrase? Just because in the piano part, in the left hand, there was a connection between the lower staff and the upper staff when it went for these thirds, right? So if you were, I don't know if you watched my pitfalls video where I pointed this out, right? That the middle voice interacts with the left-hand patterns. So by leaving gaps here, you are leaving out the interaction, the connection to the left hand, to the middle voice, right? Because if you listen to what the piano is doing, the piano doesn't go da 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 gasp da da gasp da da. It goes da 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 ching da da ching da da. You know what I mean? It connects to the thirds. And if that's the case, then why can't one of the pitches of those thirds be expressed in the second violin part, and then have this be one smooth, continuous flow of notes rather than this interrupted kind of stuttering thing, where just when you want things to be the smoothest, you are, perhaps unintentionally so, you are really, really transcribing exactly what's on the page to the detriment, I think, of a smoother line, right? So why can't, for instance, why couldn't there have been, say, E right here, right? That is one of these pitches, sounding E, this B. So da da da, E da da, right? And then this could have been, say, maybe F sharp, right? Da da. So just keeping the sense of connection going. You see this in some previous evaluations, right? Just a nice smooth flow that connects the figuration to the middle voice, right? So that's just what that's all this is lacking, right? But trading off from the figuration to ya da da da. But why can't this be da da rather than ta? Right? Why can't this be tongued right here? Ta 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 ta. Right? I just feel there just needs to be more, like it's as if like all these parts are really separate from each other. Like could this, could what's happening in the cellos or in the second violin somehow connect with this and just bring it all together and bring it all smoothly together? Something you need to think about, perhaps, right? I'm just going to check one little thing here. All right, so trombone in C. So completely unnecessary to mention that it's in C because this is not a band score, right? So some trombone parts are in B flat and in treble clef and so on. All right, so like in a score like this for concert instruments, you don't have to mention that the trombones are in C. Just write trombone and you'll be fine. So yeah, so intriguing score, really enjoyable to look at, and like one of those things that just changes the game, right? Like one of those scores that just so different, right? And so focused on a certain aesthetic that they're really worth remarking on, which is another way of saying it's remarkable, right? Literally worthy of remarking on. So excellent work, Jan. Just very different and very much its own thing, and really, really nicely done. So now we only have 2 scores left, so we better go look at the next one. Superb work, Ignacio. Yeah, I just really... It's another score that is very lovable and has beautiful colors and wonderful calculations and foreseeing a lot of issues that I might have in my own checklist of evaluation criteria. Yeah, you really did get a lot of things right on that list, right? For instance, having emotional and timbral progressions, and considering issues about pitch weight being in the upper middle register and so on and so forth, and then going on, having expansion of scope, avoiding predictability and the patterns and everything else. Now, saying all that, there's still a lot that needs to be adjusted, but it still is great, and I really love the sort of imagination unleashed as we get towards the end of this. Okay, so let's start off with our opening here. So one thing that might actually work really, really well here. I like the idea of the 2 clarinets plus the flutes, but really, the clarinet's this close to the flute, even with all the instruments balancing and everything, like if they're all listening to each other, then they'll balance beautifully. But what would be even more balanced would be if the middle voice right in here were played by second flute, right? So I think that would be, that might be an even better balance. Or if it were, I mean, there are different ways of interpreting this. I think that the way that you have got it scored right now is probably the strongest in terms of the players being able to hear each other and balance each other, right? But it's possible that, like, doubling the middle voice with second flute, or having second flute play a role in this in some way, maybe even just taking over the middle voice and everybody just really listening to each other, I think would make it work really nicely. Keeping in mind, here I've been telling people not to score middle flute down too low, but you have a situation here where it's just very, very few instruments, right? And they're all playing softly. Now, you, I'm sure, have been hearing me talk about not importing piano-like slurs into your score, and like here, you completely get it. Da ta 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 ta. So why don't we do that here? You're right. Ta 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 ta. Right, instead of ta. I mean, what is this? Is this legato tonguing? Is this slurring? What is it? Is it slurring and legato tongue? I mean, what? What do you mean by slurring over repeated notes? Right? I mean, it is possible, but the thing is that I'm just seeing it done so much automatically that I just really feel that there may be a disconnect of the applying the craft, your sense of craft to what this means, right? And you're a better orchestrator than that. I know it, right? You are really turning into a fine orchestrator. So just watch out for things like this, okay? Just, think of a different way, a different strategy, and watch out about slurring into the downbeat over and over again. Like, this is so much stronger. I mean, even in the mock-up, right? Just listening to this, like the way the phrasing works. That doesn't mean that you couldn't continue to have some kind of slurring, right? You could have, like, say, for instance, maybe portato slurring here, or you could slur down if you wanted to maintain this kind of slurring across the strong beat or the downbeat. I mean, there are, but, like, try not to do things like this, like where one instrument is slurring but the rest are playing, like, are articulating, right? Just try to have it, especially like not with an accent on the downbeat here, right? So what does that mean when you have this accented and you have a timpani roll starting strong? Okay, all right. So yeah, so continuing on, the this is nicely done. I like the little touches of harp, celesta, and glockenspiel, right? And there's more harp, more celesta. I felt that it all was really powerful, really worked great. I love the little touches of first violin right in here. I thought that helped to bring some shape to the emotional contours. And I thought that when the brass came in here with the timpani, I thought that was devastating. So it really did provide an emotional arc to this whole page. So nicely done. Yeah, just starting off stark, adding some weight, bringing in the bassoon, changing the whole character to a degree, and then with the brass just really capping things off. So I felt I thought that told the story right in here. And this last little low harp note. So like the harp is all really audible. What dynamic is it supposed to be? Write it in mezzo piano, and then possibly even like put a tenuto mark on this, or an accent, or mark it mezzo forte or something, right? So just that needs to come out, because there's going to be a lot of weight here with this last timpani stroke that could swallow up the harp note. Okay, and you could also slur these right in here, right? The downward clarinet and bassoon lines, right? They could go da da, and then here stop the slur here and then play this separately, right? But I mean, there's also something to be said for da ta 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 ta. I mean, that's also perfectly fine. Like, you could really leave it dry. But if that's the case, then then what's going on here, right? So just really think about that. All right, on to the next page. Now here we're seeing some similar problems that I mentioned before in previous evaluations about the flow of the interpretation of left-hand patterns being chopped up because there doesn't seem to be a connect to the middle voice, right? So, that it's, da 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 ba da 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 da, right? And then this actually finishing it up. Da ba ba da 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 dee do dee do da 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 dee da da. Right? So it really is a continuous flow. So your harp has got the right idea here, right? Even though it's really, I wouldn't put this part down here like transcribed exactly the way that it is down here in the left hand, but like the way that this continuously flows. Of course, there should be slurring, right, all the way across, like this, right? So I might even go so far as to mark this with just as a flag. Just finish it with a flag and then continue on. Do you see what I mean? Right, just because this kind of flow is really what should be happening in the left hand, I feel. Right? Now, perhaps you've taken the disconnect the way that it was written in and, made it more of like a rhythmic feature. Rest da da, rest da da, rest da da, rest da da, and then followed it with this. But then what's going on here, right? Why is there no connect with the D and the B here? All right, well, that is all a really small concern, except for right here. Do you really intend this to be pizzicato slurred, or did you forget to take the slur out, right? Because a pizzicato slur would be like a hammer-on, like in electric guitar, right? So the player would pluck this, and then they would hammer on their finger here, and it's such a tiny sound on cello that it cannot really be heard in a big, beautiful texture like this. All right, well, that is not the problem. To get back to what I was trying to say just a second ago, the problem here is just an overall balance problem, and I hate to say that because I know how hard you are trying to balance everything in here, right? But the first thing that I would observe is that I don't think that any of these instruments needs to be all that different from any other instrument, except for the horns and the harp and celesta, right? I think that there, overall there could have been more uniformity in the dynamics, and it would actually solve a lot of problems that I'm seeing here. Right? So first of all, you've got this melody here, and the melody is so strong, like mezzo piano in the oboes, and then you got the same pitch here. Then you've got like you don't have any octave doubling or below the violins or anything like that to fill in the space. You just have the harmony in its position according to the piano score, right? So there's kind of nothing in between here. So that really wide spacing, which is fine. Okay, if that's the way you interpret it. The overtones of certain parts in here really do fill it in well. So that's not an issue. The issue is this: these D thirds are being so strong that they really blot out what is going on with the violas. Right? Now, maybe that was the intention. You were thinking, that the violas are really, really clouding up the texture of the violins and everything else. But I would tend to disagree. I would think that, with adding the clarinet in here and everything else, that I think it would all work out perfectly fine. Right? So I think that everybody could be piano here. Right? And then the harp could be mezzo piano or even mezzo forte. And that would be the only way to make this come out. Because the way that you have it scored now, with the harp being softer than the oboe and the first and second violins, plus all of this other clutter in the landscape, the harp is just going to get swallowed up. And you can hear it. You can hear it in the mock-up. The harp is barely there. It's barely contributing anything. Whereas the celesta, which you've marked up to mezzo piano, I think that I just wonder if there was some sort of tweak made to Note Performer or to the way that Celesta is mixed. Whether the mix level is higher without telling us it's higher, right? Because I'm hearing really loud Celesta parts without anybody tweaking the mixer. Anyhow, that's just the way that it appears to me, or maybe Note Performer did something. But yeah, this is louder than it probably would end up sounding in real life. So I would mark this mezzo piano and leave this at mezzo piano, and just have everybody else play piano, right? And then give everybody the same nuances, right? Why are these violins and first and second violins not getting this same push here? I think that even the second violins could use that, right? All right. And, just speaking as, the interpretation of the rest of it, bassoon, staccato, and so on, bass clarinet joining in, and then like the second bassoon playing kind of these low kind of foghorn notes with some punctuation by the double basses. Here, I would say, like, no double bass note is going to last this long. Just mark it as a dotted half note, I think, and write piano sostenuto, P-S-O-S period, right? And then I think that you have got something that is more workable, makes more sense to the eye. All right, so then with that in mind, that would all make sense, right? Now here you're sort of pushing towards this. The horns coming in at mezzo piano, while so many other instruments are still soft, like still piano or even like pianissimo, right? The horns are just going to take over this texture, and they are going to ride it, and they are going to be it. They are going to be the texture, right? And so you can just forget about the glockenspiel and all of these other things. Like here you've got the dynamic of the oboe pushing to forte, but here mezzo piano to mezzo forte. How big of a push is that? What if your horns came in like everybody's at piano, right? Let's say that you follow my advice. Everybody's at piano. That includes your cellos here and your bassoons. It will all work fine. Trust it, right? Trust the players. Trust the natural balancing powers, right? Do not bring the flutes forward to mezzo piano, really. I mean, I don't know. Maybe in here, but everything is delicate enough to where if you just bring everybody down to piano, I think that the texture will work. All right? Okay, so let's assume that is what is going to happen here. Then horns come in at pianissimo, okay, push to mezzo forte. Everybody else pushes to forte, all right? And then you've got something that will balance in here. Celesta, probably, no matter what happens, is not going to really contribute that much, but I would say leave it in, right? Now, let us talk about your choice of instruments or your choice of players in here. So you got a nice long note here by your first player. Then they're going to have to play this. Then you give them a place to breathe here. Wouldn't it be better to have this be the second player, and then the first player comes in, right, and then breathes? And here you're saying A2, so both of your players are just kind of going crazy on this, and then the second player has to keep playing. So where does the second player breathe? How about this? Second clarinet, first clarinet. Then second clarinet, and then make this all first clarinet, and then second clarinet at the end, right? I think that would work the best. And that way they each, and then have them dovetail, right? So so like I said, first, and then the first could just keep playing, and then dovetail on this written A. Second taking over, once again dovetailing with the first on the second A, and so on. It'll be a little bit messy with a difference, like some stems pointing up, some stems pointing down, and so on as they trade off and everything else. But I still think that is a better solution than the way you got it scored. Because the way you've got it scored now, the second player's got nowhere to breathe, right? And the player's just continuously engaged, and you're having them push this. You're having them push this really, really high. In a way that, like, you get that phased sound of A2 clarinets that will be so much bigger and brighter than the violas. Now, I think it's really cool that you're starting with violas. But at the point that you go to this area right in here, I think you should trade off to second violins. Okay? Because this is so much more under their fingers and so much more like their kind of repertoire, right? And then just change to violas here, and then you can keep it in the violas. And then, of course, as this continues on, which we don't have a continuation of, it will continue to work fine to have these harmonies in the violas rather than the second violins. I would just say, start in the violas because that's an intriguing texture, right? Violas combined with clarinet, and then trade off right on this beat. So they're going to be do yo 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 b, right? Which is really easy. And then the second violins will be going thirds, and then D, 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 right? Now, as to like the bowing, I think pianissimo, taking the entire bar under one bow, that's all fine. Right? And I think when it gets to here, I would break it up into, I would take this under, I would want this under. I would want to do two bows here. And and I think that the bowing pattern here, breaking it up into two separate bows. I think, with all respect, I think that you should break with the beam here, because like right here you're showing us in the clarinet, you just really want a nice continuous thing to go on. So it's just better. It's better with the way the player's brain is working, and also it just sounds better because of the phrasing of all the other instruments and the beat and everything else. Just break the slur with the beam. Okay. All right. So bringing the glockenspiel here, that's very, very cool. I think the glockenspiel reinforcing the celesta will bring that part out more. I mean, just kind of one comment, like how much celesta can a piece have, right? Are we possibly over-sugaring things, right? So, harp kind of, is little sprinkles of lemon drops, right? And celesta is like powdered sugar, right? And so, I mean, how much sweetening can we put into this? This might be something to think about, especially if you're kind of getting muscular here with your horns, right? Forte accents on mezzo forte. This essentially is forte when it hits, like the accent will be forte. Which is all the more reason why these other parts should be forte, I think. I love this low foghorn contrabassoon down here. Very neat. Okay. And you know what? See, like we see the gray shading here, right? Just put that right there. Okay. Same thing with the. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why the player can't read this. Okay, I think it just works better. And then same thing, like bass clarinet. You're saying mezzo forte down to what? I would just put the piano there, right, and match everybody else up. So it's just a very cool score, Ignacio, and you are a familiar face around these parts of orchestration challenges, I believe, if my memory isn't playing tricks on me with all the other things I have to remember right now. So I really, I'm kind of imagining what you would do with the 2024 example that I'm going to be bringing in. And, not to mention next year, which will be very different, and then which option you're going to choose if you stick around to 2025 would just be so interesting to me, right? Because it really is going to say something about like which direction people choose, what option that they choose in, for our 10th anniversary. So great score, man. Really loved it, all of it, and I hope that some of my comments here clear some things up and give you some ideas for your own project. All right, now on to our final score for this wonderful collection of entries from our website subscribers. And what a perfect way to finish up this collection of scores. I just felt every score was so strong in getting to the musical personality, the orchestrational personality of each of our website subscribers who participated. Just really wonderful, like a box of goodies for me to unpack and show to you all. And I felt that this was just as strong as any other entry, and in a really great way. And in fact, it really made good bookends with the first entry. So, with that in mind, let's just dive straight into the orchestration of this, and I'll point out any problems as we go. I think a lot of people, perhaps bass players, have already looked at this and are thinking about what they would want to say about it. Okay, but we'll get there. All right. I love the way you start off here, pizzicato, and that's kind of that nice dry sound while accompanying these beautifully smooth instruments. Now, I've said everything that I want to say about pianistic slurring onto wind parts and ending up covering repeated notes and everything else, Noah. So you better have listened to everything else on this video, okay? Because that's all the information I want to share about it. But just to say, I think that with respect, I think you may be on the wrong track with the way that you are slurring your winds right in here, okay? All right, but I've said as much as I need to say. So this mixture of English horn with clarinets, I think is a very good one, actually, and it's really a pity that the mock-up is not really showing you how good that is, right? It's kind of a piano English horn in its middle register, and it's kind of it's showing you kind of the more flute-like quality of that sound, which has a relationship with the clarinets. I mean, that will come out in a live performance of this, but I feel the English horn player finding themselves at the top of the 6/4 chord, such as it is, right? It actually is not a 6/4 chord, it's an interpretation of a 6 chord, which is something different. But finding themselves at the top of the harmonic stack, they will play out a little bit and they will balance everything together. Like the way that it is now, it really feels like the clarinets, on the mock-up, it feels like the clarinets are shouting over the English horn a little bit, and that is not what's going to happen in a live situation. Now, this is completely unnecessary. We know that it's piano, right? So you don't need to tell us again. I love the idea of putting in nuances here. We know that it's piano. Stick with the piano, right? Okay, and then pizzicato doesn't need to be does not need to be in bold type, right? It could just be sorry. Just in regular type, right? That works fine. So yeah, and then you have like little touches of pizzicato doubling the clarinets. And, here we have flutes coming in, mezzo piano. I think that's wise, because otherwise the flutes are just going to get absorbed into the timbre of everything else as you go to octaves here, right? That's just really neat, though. I love the combination of English horn and flute. I think that works great. Okay, crescendo to what, though? Right? Why don't we have a destination dynamic? Right? Crescendo and then poco crescendo. And then you have a diminuendo mark, like right after the poco crescendo, and then you have a diminuendo, like another diminuendo here. And there's no change at all indicated in the pizzicato strings. So what's going on here? Did you just put the crescendo and diminuendo marks in here because they were in the piano part. Just because it's in the piano part doesn't mean, like when you're adding so many other, when you have so many other dynamic considerations in your part, then just really think about what the things that you're using from the original part. What do they mean, especially text markings, right? When you're really getting by fine on hairpins, so maybe it should be interpreted. Like, see, like I think this may be from the, this invisible hairpin is from the template score, right? So, it would be better, perhaps, if that were visible, right? And the crescendo mark were not, right? And then you could, like, once you have that hairpin staring you in the face of what this crescendo really means, then you got to decide what's the destination dynamic, right? Are we getting all the way up to mezzo forte, I think, right? Would it be possible just to interpret this, just like this? Here, let's make this visible. Right? Up to what dynamic, right? So I just think there's more finesse that you could have put into this, to just really tell us exactly what you mean. Because the way that it is right now, it's really inexact. It's leaving a lot of things up to the conductor, let's face it. And by the time we get to here, this bass clarinet's going to come in on a piano note, and everybody else is going to be mezzo piano or even mezzo forte. And then the poco crescendo, right? And then here you got your first bassoon is coming in here on this E, sort of intersecting with your bass clarinet, and he's soft, right? So poco crescendo, and you can leave it nebulous like this, but I just feel it. And then you have the further diminuendo, and you don't tell us where you end. Do you end on pianissimo or what, right? All this stuff really, really matters. And then especially if you want this to tail off seamlessly and disappear into the other parts, then I really would bring down the dynamic to like pianissimo on these notes, just so that they really. But of course, you can't be seamless with this because you have different qualities of timbre, right? You have the pizzicato here, right? And then you have all this weight, the English horn and the bassoon having that double reed quality. So the diminuendo getting absorbed into the clarinets, right? Who are already getting softer. So you're creating a bunch of possible problems. So maybe you could even bring this down to triple P or something, but just really have it just go into a fine point and blending into the dynamic of the clarinet there, the first clarinet, right? And your entrances don't need to be marked with bold type. Just a regular old number one with a period after it in standard regular type. And then here you've got these this harp stuff going on here, and the combination, like you're sort of getting a kind of a double string effect with the enharmonic tones. That's all fine. All right, so here we're getting into this further problem here. Okay, so here you're saying arco divisi, all harmonics sounding E natural. Okay. All right. So the first thing is that like your bass players are going to prefer to not use artificial harmonics. So only one of these harmonic nodes is a natural, right? So this is A with a C sharp touch node, so the major third touch node above the open string, and then then here, like you're saying, hold down a G, add the third above that, hold down the E, add the fourth above that, and so on and so forth. And just this is something that's not really that natural to the double bass. So there might be other nodes, other ways to get this E. But here's the problem too, is that not all harmonics are in tune, right? Not all natural harmonics are in tune with each other. Right? Some of them are just a little off, and some are a little weird, and everything else. You might get the effect that you want way better, if you give this E to your double basses, right? So they'd be playing the E above the staff, mezzo piano, arco, and then you have your cellos coming in and just playing an artificial harmonic on the low E touch 4 node, right? And then it would sound the same E as, as the clarinets and so on and so forth, right? And so that is probably a better way of getting that same E sound there. Okay, I mean, it's a lovely idea. I almost wonder if you couldn't ease into it, start off pianissimo or triple P and then just ease into it piano and then diminuendo out. And maybe have it last a little bit longer than just to the half bar. So, I mean, there are ways around this to just sort of refine it and make it more realistic. But I would say try to avoid this kind of thing where you have, let's say that you did work out that all natural harmonics, right? And you figured out a way for 3 different groups of bass players to play the same note coming from 3 different directions in natural harmonics. And then you heard it live, and then you realized that some of the pitches were slightly out of tune, right, compared to the rest of the orchestra, or say the clarinet's still holding down the sounding E, and so on, right? So that is a risk, right? Is that especially when you get down to shorter and shorter nodes, closer and closer to the open string. Things start to sound weirder and weirder. And there is the additional problem that getting smaller than the touch 4 node is always a risk, because it's not just the tuning, it is also the softness, right? Things become softer and harder to get clear, right? And sometimes you'll hear the sound of the bow more than you hear the sound of the harmonic, just because it's hard for the player to get it to speak, and just for some reason, just on that time that they bowed, it just didn't click. It just didn't want to fall into place with half of your players, right? So I would just say, just really watch out for getting smaller than a touch 4 node, all right? I mean, touch major third, this is not a huge crisis, but but once again, you have an artificial harmonic indicated and so on. It's just something that most bassists would probably want to avoid, right? Okay. It's more of a bass concerto kind of a thing, I would say. But I mean, there might be some bassists out there who eat this stuff up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they play a lot of contemporary music and a lot of contemporary orchestral music, and they're used to playing fingered artificial harmonics. So it just depends. But most double bassists that I play with kind of they just sort of wince. It's kind of they clutch at their spleen. All right. So now let's go on to the next page. And I just really love these little rips for the bass clarinet. Question is, how long can you continue doing them, right? Before it just kind of the ear stops paying attention, right? Which is a shame, because what if you did it every other bar? And then did maybe a different way of getting, bringing the pattern up to here. Maybe more like bassoons working together, and then because it's just a shame. I feel that by the time you get to your 7th bar of that whole idea, I feel like my ear is getting used to it, and I don't want it to. I want it to go, oh yes, feels great whenever it happens. And then, okay, I've already commented on the fact that there is absolutely no need for the pattern to lose the middle notes that are expressed in other places, right? Because, once again, just one more time, the bottom staff of the left hand in the original piano part, all right, is implying a connection with the middle staff, right? And that connection with the middle staff would help keep the pattern, the interpretation of the patterns, on a nice, even, continuous flow, rather than interrupting them with rests like this. I just really feel the da-da, da-da kind of feel, which isn't really in the original piano music. In the piano music, it's you know what I mean? It has got that wonderful feel. And even in the pattern itself could be interpreting some of the, could be continuing some of the, of what's going on in the other parts. So anyways, just possibly a little bit more evening out of that. Now, we've got kind of similar to the previous score, mezzo piano on the outsides, and then piano tremolo on the insides, and so on. Just a lot of dynamic mixing. With all respect, I feel like the thing that needs to be mixed is the harp, right? I think the only way that the harp is going to be able to compete with everything that's going on here is if it's mezzo forte, right? And I think that you should turn it up to mezzo forte. I hate to use the word turn it up. Increase the strength to mezzo forte, and then also incorporate more of those pitches, more of the pitches that one naturally feels in the piano part. Like this could be an E, this could be an A, instead of just using a rest, right? And this could crest over the top, incorporating some of these pitches, and then end on an F sharp or a D, right? And then jump down to the next thing. And you could split it up between the hands so that the upper part, you could express it as treble clef notes or have a bass clef here just trading off with the notes and just figure out how the hand pattern should work. All right, so with that in mind, with the harp part stronger and everybody else playing piano, right? It does not need to be mezzo piano at all. It could just be piano espressivo, right? I think you can bring up your clarinets, your clarinet family instruments, and if you feel that the octave melody here, beautifully expressed, by the way, in octaves in first violins and cellos, wonderful. I think that which is a kind of an obvious thing in a way, isn't it? But I'm not really seeing it in that many other scores. However, obvious or not, I think that there is absolutely no need. Like those instruments are so bright, there's no need to bring up their dynamic compared to the other instruments. Now, if you want them to be a little bit more solid, you could perhaps double them with flutes. So I would say flute on the top and maybe oboe or English horn doubling the cellos, right? And then you have plenty of solidity, and you don't need to turn up the dynamic to mezzo piano, right? You've got it, and then all of this stuff will work. And look, right here, like I see what you're doing here. You're saying that these are unified. Just use a normal tie. Don't worry about it, right? So you're just saying that this is one long thing, and there's no rearticulation. There's no sense of like kind of starting the tremolo again in the middle of the bar. So yeah, but don't worry about the dashed tie. Just use regular old tie. People understand it. They're just saying, "Oh, you want me to tremolo from here to there on a B," right? Rather than their eye saying, "Oh, there's another note. Oh yeah, it's just another B. I'm continuing it on," right? It's just saving that step of time. All right. Just to check something. Oh yeah, so like on the previous page, yeah. So you had an F flat. I would put the F sharp here at the beginning of the bar, so they have plenty of time to, if they are reading this on the fly, they just got to rehearsal, they just got the part handed to them, then they have more time to just throw back in that F sharp if they, if the page turn is bad or something like that. Okay. Yeah, and why not just like, why not have this, instead of having this is a little awkward, D, D, E, why not just have the D hold a little longer and have the second bassoonist go B, D, C, right? Rather than having them both jump down to that D. I mean, it's totally possible, but it's just, it's just not all that comfortable or graceful. Just have the first bassoonist slur to here and the second bassoonist slur that, and then just tongue on the downbeat, right? Ta, 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 right? I think that works better. All right, now here you're saying unison pizzicato, and you're saying pizzicato lasting most of the bar. So the pizzicato will at most last until the middle of the bar, right? So I would just have a quarter note here, piano SOS period for sostenuto, right? So yeah, unison pizzicato because you had all those different things, right? Okay, so that's fine, but just I just have it sostenuto at the most tied to a dotted quarter note, because I think this is, I mean, they will be adding vibrato to it to get it to last longer, but you're just not going to hear it last very long. Don't be the guy who raises their hand and say, hey, can the bassist make that pizzicato last longer? Right. If you want this pitch to last longer, add somebody who's not being used, like maybe contrabassoon playing pianissimo. Here's where I would mix the dynamics. You're just having, and here you're doing that, right? So yeah, I think this is overdoing it in terms of the. I mean, you don't need. This is completely unnecessary. The tie is unnecessary. So just have it half the bar at the most. All right. But yeah, I love the idea of the harmony from below being played in tremolo. That's a lovely idea. And then when the horns come in here, they start to flex, right? And you have poco a poco crescendo to mezzo forte here. So here's the apex of your phrase. Why can't things go up to mezzo forte by here rather than here? Right? You're going da 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 da. Why can't it be da 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 and come down in your dynamic here, right? And push it all the way to mezzo forte if you like, but mark it in all parts rather than some parts, right? Everybody be at piano. Firm this line up with some guests, as I suggested in the winds if you need to, but otherwise, all piano, mezzo forte on the harp. This should be piano. This should be piano. You've marked it as such. And then here, yeah, I agree with this. If you are just adding a little bit of tone to the low pizzicato, but then push things up to, I'd say, an overall mezzo forte and all parts. Horns, if you really want them to blend with everything and not just shout over your entire orchestra, pianissimo. All right? And then push them up to mezzo piano here. And then back them back down. Have a diminuendo here. Right? Anyway, so those are my recommendations. I like this connection, this connective tissue right in here between the bassoons and so on. And then the A2, there's really no need for A2 bassoons right there. That could just be second bassoon or first bassoon continuing on. Yeah, and then it looks like you're headed somewhere with this. It would have been interesting to see, what is coming next. But yeah, there is no page 3, so. But I mean, cool score, as I mentioned before. So, I mean, and a great ending, once again, to this whole collection. So it just remains for me to thank you, Noah, for your participation, along with everybody else in this video, if I haven't said it enough. I really do appreciate all the work that everybody put into their entries. And I'm also, I'm in a position now where I just, I finished up catching up by a week. It was almost more like 8 or 9 days in advance of stuff to do, and now I'm coming back to it. And as I'm launching those videos, I'm seeing all the comments, and that just makes me feel so happy. So if we could just keep up that energy, if everybody who got an evaluation in this video could comment on everybody else's videos just for a start, that would be great. Not to mention, I know that there are going to be comments from our other participants who were in other evaluation videos, whether they were website subscribers or Patreon supporters. I've just, thanks everybody so much for bringing that energy into this. And also, thanks to the Patreon supporters for making all this possible. Just absolutely could not happen without you. And also just like a shout out to my friends in Ukraine. And just, some help is on the way. And there's going to be some more information about that after the beginning of October. Okay, everybody? So thanks to you all. I really appreciate this enormously, and it's just such a kick for me to do this. Every time I finish a video like this, I just feel so full of happiness. I think positive energy. I'm a Californian, so that also makes sense to me, but I think happiness is like a simpler, more honest way of saying that. I just feel really happy looking at these scores and they just fill me with a lot of hope for the future, for all the people who are going to be composing orchestral music and keeping that precious kind of musical expression alive. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks again.